acknowledge 4 things in this bigger land acknowledgement that are super important for my talk, and that actually already says, the acknowledgement itself says everything I'm going to say during the talk. So the first acknowledgement that we do in Brazil is the acknowledgement of the land as a living entity, not as a property or as resource. We acknowledge the land as something that contains us, rather than the other way around. And we acknowledge that our bodies are also land. And in this acknowledgement, we recognize that the land is in distress, right? And if the land is in distress around us, our bodies are also in distress because we're entangled with the land. The second acknowledgement is the acknowledgement of ancestors. And ancestors are not those who have only those who have come before. They are also those who are yet to come. And we have different responsibilities to ancestors who came before and ancestors yet to come. So the ancestors who came before, we have the responsibility to honor their sacrifices by actually correcting their mistakes. Then the third acknowledgement is the acknowledgement that for us to be here today, there have been a lot of sacrifices, both voluntary and involuntary. So in this context here, it would be important to say that universities and spaces like this depend on systemic, structural, ongoing violence for them to be able to exist. So our privilege, the clothes we wear, the food we eat, where we stay, how we carry our careers, is based on violence towards the planet and towards other species and towards other human beings. So we cannot forget that. But the idea is not to be drowning in the sadness of it, or the frustration, or the anger, or in blame, or in shame, or in guilt, but to use it as leverage for responsibility, for a different kind of responsibility towards ourselves, towards each other, and towards the planet at large. Then the fourth acknowledgement is the acknowledgement that we're all a big family, not only of human beings, but of human beings and non-human beings, which includes other species, but also goes beyond that. And again, to acknowledge that there is a dis-ease, and that dis-ease is grounded on the imposed sense of separation between us, human beings, and the rest of nature.
Now, among the extraordinary things that we have created in the space of higher education is the concept of design. Now, design, we can look at it in many, many, many different ways. Some ways of looking at design, can be perceived in a very negative way. We can very negatively use the term, for example, social design. But the reality is that we live in a world in which proactive decision-making towards the benefit of society is a form of intellectual social design. So it could potentially be an extraordinary positive thing. And in our classrooms, we enable individuals to grow into a space in which they can think of how to better deliver our societies. Technology seems to have taken over us. And that technology that seems to have taken over us is disrupting our society and disrupted our higher educational world in a way such that it appears, to have left it behind, and a revolution is necessary. We have to change the way in which we think, and we have to move away from the idea that we are imparting knowledge. The creation of knowledge, the education of people, is part of a collective, and it is part of a common shared experience that enables both parties to think in a different way. That's what a space of higher education is all about. It is a space not where we impart knowledge, not where we teach things to people, but where we as a collective learn how to learn. The one thing that we need to revolutionize, the one thing that we need to dramatically change, the one thing we need to dramatically revisit, and we need to carefully rethink, is the relationships that now exist in universities. What we should be thinking of is education-led research. It is research that actually enables us to create this dialogue, to foster this creativity, and to enable people to actually solve the complex and unique problems that society brings us. It is about recognizing our mistakes. It is about recognizing what we have achieved, and it's about recovering, rethinking, and potentially in the future, reinventing the role of mentorship.
I'm really curious because you all have either in entirety or all of your practices take place in universities. And I think if we try to reconcile the two talks we had today about the entanglement and how we do that, and the dialogues and what that means for the classroom, I wonder how can we reconcile these things? Can we bring entanglement and dialogue into the studio setting or into the university setting in your classes? How do you see bringing these future uncertainties and the unpredictability that we see, that we've been talking about, the crisis that we're experiencing now, into the teaching that you do to actually solve problems creatively and bring back that creativity and innovation? So
my position at Harvard is called professor in practice. So my job is to bring in practice and academia together. So I've never felt that there is anything but having to deal with the entanglement. Obviously, I was listening to the earlier presentations, which obviously map the scale of challenge that face us, whether it's in academia or in the real world. But as designers, we have to break them down into, if we keep on thinking of that scale, we might just as well collapse now. So we need to keep hope and break down the problems at the day-to-day scale of practice and believe that our mission is to address them.
I agree with you, Jose. It's not imparting knowledge. We are on this side of the desk. The students are on the other side. And so I think that could be also nice to make blended classes within students in architecture, students in engineering, so that both of them could become more open-minded.
I think the space of the university can be more radical in encouraging cross-fertilization of knowledge and breaking into the silos in a more natural way, so that we encourage learners and teachers, etc., to perhaps think of new forms of knowledge that don't exist now, the forms of knowledge that exist at the intersection between them.
I think if we actually recognize that universities are about people, and we recognize that universities are about the exchanges between people, then I think we will have a much more natural evolution, of the way in which we structure things to enable these interactions to happen. And the reality is that I don't really think we need to resolve this entanglement. The entanglement is the richness of the dialogue.
But one metaphor we are using there is, it goes like this. Remember the ivory tower, that archetype. And that archetype was pretty problematic. Especially in the Americas, we're thinking about colonialism and slavery as what sustains that archetype. And let's not talk about racism and sexism as well as part of that structure. But that archetype is no longer possible. And there are questions about it, if it ever was. What we have at the moment as the university is, at best, a leaning tower of Pisa on a swamp, right? And it's gonna fall. So if we're bringing in the planetary boundaries breached, and if we bring collapse to bear as a layer on what we're doing, like this idea that in 5 or 10 years, what's viable and comfortable and familiar is not gonna be possible, the university is also going to change significantly. And it can fall hard, and then we lose a lot. If it falls hard, we lose a lot. But if it falls softly, it can become, in the process, a tree. And as a tree that goes down, it can become a nursing log for the mycelium and the moss that then create the entanglement with society and with all the other entities of society. Then it becomes useful. And then all the resources that have been sequestered here become part of the ecology. And then they are redistributed in the ecology through the mycelium network.
What I try to do is to help my students develop a discipline of thinking and practicing while they are at university. So rather than encouraging them to do like the best, to produce the best result, is to focus on the process, because design is a process, and architects especially, we work with a lot of different specialists, and we need to train ourselves about that very thing, that our ideas are going to develop in response and with a lot of other people.
One thing that we're emphasizing for the teachers, because their work is to develop design relationships and processes with kids every day. So we're talking about their education as lifelong and life-wide inquiry.